Hello and welcome to the Life and Leadership Podcast, where we're developing military leaders one question at a time. Our next guest is Chief Master Sergeant April Brittain. Over her 30 years of active duty service in the Air Force and the Space Force, she served as the Senior Enlisted Leader of Space Delta II and as the Commandant of the Enlisted Professional Military Education Academy at Peterson Space Force Base. She's an expert at developing leaders across all levels of the enlisted force, and we're lucky enough to have her here with us today. Chief, thank you for making time and welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Chris. I am super excited to be here.
And we're super excited to have you here. Just standard disclaimer question. Are the opinions you express today yours or the official position of the United States Space Force?
Everything will be based on my experience, so definitely my opinion.
Thanks, Chief. So, across your 30 years of service, is there any advice that you wish you had been given earlier?
Absolutely. And so I didn't get this advice until I was probably 28 and a half years in. And so definitely wish I would have got it earlier. And it came from another chief friend of mine who he retired after, many years, started his own business, and now he's kind of out doing that and spreading his leadership lessons worldwide. And so his name's Chief Master Sergeant Todd Simmons. And he had told me, one of the things that he lived by and treated, all along was treat every single enlistment or commission like you're getting out. Instead of, I'm going to do, because sometimes we come in, we don't really know, and you think, I'll do one enlistment, and then you're in that second enlistment, and then before you know it, you're approaching 30 years, and you don't have your plan as developed, and you're not as ready as you think you should have been. And it doesn't get any less scary as the further you go to get out. Whether it's 10 years, 30 years, getting out and transitioning into the civilian sector is scary. So treat every enlistment or commission like you're getting out. Look at that milestone. Look at what you can do with that time you have in front of it. Always have a plan, because life can shift at any time.
So as a young officer, right, what's something that you can do to collaborate with your senior NCOs and take care of those enlisted members of your team who are facing that decision of, hey, right, the re-enlistment period's coming up, what do I do? If I choose to get out, what options are available, right? How does leadership fit into that equation?
I think the installation does a lot when it comes to the transition seminars. There's a lot of, not just the mandated congressionally things that we've got to do with the TAPs, everybody's got to do that, but they offer a lot of supplemental stuff where they're doing resume writing, they're doing job seeking, they're doing boots to business. There's a lot of stuff that's already established that you don't have to find on your own or, develop on your own. You just have to go and talk to the right folks. And so your Airmen and Family Readiness Center, I think now we just call them Military Family Readiness Centers, but have a ton of those tools. And then it's just like anything, you've got to have a plan of action. And so you've got to come up with your milestones of, okay, if I'm getting out 2 years, what do I need to be doing right now? Building up your LinkedIn, getting your resume floated, doing a lot of information interviews, with folks that are in the line of work that you want to be in, because not everything that we do, sadly, it doesn't all translate when you cross out. And so it's a hard thing to go through. It's way easier if you plan.
So I guess then that's the question of where's that line, right? As a senior enlisted leader or as a young officer, right? Where's the line between taking care of the mission and carving out time for people to take care of themselves?
Yeah, and so I think that line is always on the move. I feel like it's a very cryptic line.
If it was an easy question to answer, it wouldn't be worth asking, right?
Yeah, 100%. And so, we're talking balance. You get that question a lot, like, how do you find balance? I could tell you I'd never found balance. I can tell you that a good friend of mine, who happened to also be our first chief of the Space Force, Chief Toberman, used to always refer to things as like Pokemon, like it's not a Pokemon that you're just going to stumble and find, and because you're out there Pokemon hunting. It's something that you have to create. And so carving out deliberate calendar time, not looking at Microsoft Outlook and all those white, time chunks as time for everybody else and every other thing, but actually putting yourself in there and deliberately marking, okay, today for 15 minutes I'm going to call and I'm going to make my medical appointment. Or today for, an hour I'm going to actually go to lunch and go to my kids' school and share lunch with them. Things like that, where you had to be very deliberate. And then setting a pushback time. There's a point where you could stay at work till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night and still feel like you can't get your head above water. But what's actually important? What's a glass ball that if I drop it is going to cause other effects versus what are the plastic balls that can just kind of fall around you and maybe they'll roll away and never come back? That'd be great. But that constant prioritization that you got to do, part of it is getting yourself just on the calendar and being a priority to yourself, because we all know you're way better if you take care of yourself. It's just hard to do. People will suck that time from you if you let them.
Yes. But well, obviously you have decades of experience in knowing the difference between a glass ball and a plastic ball, but can you unpack that mental math that you're doing so that someone who's coming in and has months of experience can help know the difference?
Yeah, and so I live in mental math. It's my favorite thing to do, right? It's fun and exhausting at the same time. But looking at your day, and because when you start really leading people, your day is no longer your day. You walk in and you could have these tasks in mind and this focus and this stuff that you've got a checklist you think you're going to get done, and then somebody comes in and something else is on fire or something's happened in their life, and now you've got to rejuggle and prioritize. So you're constantly in this juggling, state. I think it's really just, going in with, okay, what 3 things do I need to do today? And maybe those 3 things shift as the day goes on, but you can start your day with that. And then as life happens and people happen, well, now you've got to just on the spot be able to willing to navigate that. And so, you can instinct, I don't know, there's a lot of this just, there's not a checklist, there's not a book, there's just instinct. If somebody comes into your office and they're visibly upset, you probably need to stop what you're doing and work through that. If it's something that you can say, hey, I've really got this other thing, but I can do this in an hour, come back, as long as you just don't leave people feeling like they're neglected and you just don't care, right? Like, it's okay to say, okay, I've got this thing I've got to do right now, and this is important to me, so I want you to come back to me. Just give me an hour. But there is no master calculator on how to do it. A lot of it is your gut. A lot of it is you just knowing what right feels like, and sometimes it's just you got to feel like it's okay enough for right now, because you're not always going to know. Just go with that instinct.
Mm-hmm. And there's a aspect of sacrificial leadership in allowing your subordinates to come in and hijack parts of your day, right? Those 3 things you plan on doing turns into 1 because your people need you.
Yeah.
So this question from the Force comes from Christian at Schriever Space Force Base. How can I identify the leaders who are only in it for themselves versus the ones who are actually going to take care of me?
Yeah, so that's tough. I feel like trust is a feeling, right? And so some folks sadly lead with the belief that you have to trust them because they've got some kind of positional authority above you. They've got that rock, paper, stripes game, right? Like stripes always win. I never played that game. People knew if I walked into a room, and whether I was an E8, E9, whatever, that if I had more rank than them, okay, I get to ultimate decision space, but it doesn't mean that I'm always right. And so for me, how would I align myself? There was a feeling, that if I spend enough time around folks and I know how I operate and I look at how they operate, I'm going to come up with some kind of feelings about how I feel about this person. And trust it's hugely in the middle of that. If I don't feel like I can trust you, I may work for you because I have to, because you've got authority of some kind over me. It's way better if I like you. And so you hear it all the time where people will say these little punchy lines where I always call them the dumb things we say, because there's just things that we say that we've said for so long that I just don't. They make me cringe every time I hear them. One of those is it's called, it's likership, not leadership. Like, it's called leadership, not likership, as if they don't have to like you. It's better if they do. It's easier if they do. They're going to follow you further if they do. And so how do you differentiate between those folks? You just spend enough time around them, and you look at your moral character, you look at their moral character, and you see what aligns. And then you've got to figure out, okay, now how am I going to actually navigate that with them? Because it's still a partnership sometimes, whether you like it or not. But you can do a lot of mentoring from below. You don't have to be in a position of authority or have the rank to actually mentor somebody. And so I found just creative ways to still kind of mold and mentor that person to make them better, even if they outranked me.
And what advice do you have for that young lieutenant who doesn't have a lot of experience in the military, but is in a position where he or she has to lead up the chain? Maybe a weak captain, weak major, people trying to do the best, but maybe that individual doesn't come from that same technical background and is struggling to grow into the role. Right?
Yeah.
How does a lieutenant lean on his or her team of senior NCOs to lead up the chain?
Well, I mean, here's the reality: is we see you, Lieutenant Bars, and we know you don't know a lot, right? So we don't set the bar incredibly too high. Not to say that lieutenants aren't smart, because they are, but when it comes to the leadership piece, if we see a young officer in front of us and we see those bars, it's going to tell us, okay, they're pretty new at this. Maybe not. People come in at different stages of life now, and so everybody's got different experience in life behind them. But the general going in is that they're probably not going to have led a lot of teams and a lot of people up to this point, if they're pretty young. And so I think that's okay. I think there's value in that. I think there's transparency that has to happen, though. You really have to just be willing to not puff out your chest and be the big LT. It works on the enlisted side too, and just let people around you teach you. Be okay with saying, I don't know what I'm doing. I did that all the way up through the rank of chief, to be quite honest. I didn't do it at the rank of lower ranks, because we learned very early on imposter syndrome and how to do that, right? We learned how to fake it till we make it, which is another dumb thing we say. And so I just got more comfortable with saying, I don't know why everybody's looking at me right now. I don't know. Because I was in a new position or something where I just didn't have that knowledge that other folks around me, they knew more than I did, and I just had to be willing to say that out loud. I don't know. I've been in the Air Force 5 minutes. I feel like you can have a little humor with it. And people will teach you because they know that you're in a position where you now need to go overcome some obstacle for them or advocate for them in some way. And so if you're just transparent with what you know and what you don't know, I think people really respect that versus you just walking around because we know a lot of times that you don't have the experience yet, and I think that that's okay to embrace that.
So from your experience, what was the impact of a leader acknowledging their imperfections and showing some vulnerability?
Yeah. I think people think they'll lose credibility, and that's why they shy away from doing it. I think you gain credibility. I think you're willing to let people see you as a human. And we're flawed, right? We're not perfect. And so I think that the more that you do that, the more that they see that, okay, I can actually trust you, I can align with you, I can help, because there's just no expectation that anytime I come forward with an idea, you're going to shut me down. My idea is going to be treated as if it's not as good as yours. I just think it's a better overall collaboration. Interestingly enough, I read an article not too long ago. I think Harvard Business Review has an article out there, and they just call it problem-led leadership. Has nothing to do with who's been doing this the longest, because that's another thing we say a lot. I've been in this a long time. People don't want to hear those things these days because the problems of long time ago aren't necessarily the problems of today, right? And so, but Harvard, and their article just called it problem-led leadership, which just means whoever's the smartest, regardless of how old or whatever they may be, for the moment of the problem that we're in right now, that's who's in charge. That's who's leading this effort. And the moment that they've done their part and it's still something that we need to work on and it shifts away from them towards somebody else, we're okay with letting go of that and not just worrying about, okay, well, if I stay in charge and I stay, at the helm of this ship, well, then I get all the credit. No one cares about credit anymore. It's about leading through the problem, getting the right team around you to do it, and then not worrying about, at the end of the day, that outcome will be good. You'll get the credit that you might be looking for, but that shouldn't be what you're starting with.
So, Chief, to pivot on you, thinking about the enlisted development model, right? Where do young officers fit into that, and what kind of impact can a young officer have on the development of his or her young enlisted troops?
That's a good question. So when we redesigned and started to really think about PME for the Space Force, we pivoted a little bit because all along, the whole time I was in the Air Force, you always saw how we trained differently. We trained leadership differently. And it was stovepipes. You guys went over here, you did your thing, we stayed over here in ours. But a lot of times those geographic locations were the same. It's just we couldn't ever really get it right when it came to syncing and training and teaching together. I think that's something that space is looking a little more at, like how do we bring in not just the officers, but the civilian side too, because at the end of the day, we all have to do this big thing. We have to do it together, and we can't do that if we train and learn separately, right? And so when it comes to how do you interweave that in, I mean, I felt like not every meeting, because people don't want to go to more meetings, but every engagement where I felt like it mattered, you needed those different perspectives in, because our role was shifting. We were going back to very much technicians, up all the way. I mean, the Air Force is doing that too with warrant officers and that kind of stuff. But so we did a lot of looking at, like, hey, when is it important that we come together? When is it okay that we're apart? We did a lot of mission command. I don't know if the Air Force has talked a lot about mission command, but just learning, okay, what's mutual trust look like? What does it look like when we have these disciplined initiatives, right, where we know where our left and rights are, and the mutual trust is there to where the officer can trust that we're not gonna break those left and rights. And so having a lot of conversation, it came with a lot of just communication and conversation of us getting together and figuring out when do we need to come together? When are those moments that it matters that we get all those different opinions, versus when is it like it's okay to just trust and let us fly and know that we're not going to fly too far. I think the model between officer and enlisted has to shift a little bit like that. It has to go back to that more, where it's, oh God, what do we call it? Basically like decentralized execution, right? You don't have to always go back and mother may I, father may I over and over. It's just you've got that disciplined initiative to know what you can and can't do, because they've partnered with you enough and you've had enough conversations to know those things. I don't know if I answered that question at all, but I feel like there's a shift that's happening, and it's a needed shift between the O's and the E's.
Well, and extrapolating on that and really using your time in the Air Force as a foil, how much does the Space Force need its young leaders to become technical experts versus becoming, let's call it, more technical integrators?
Yeah, and so I think on the officer side, we're shifting them a little more to technical integrators, to the point, that now they're sending them through this officer training course, and I think it's 10 months. When I left the service, it was about 10 months long, and our officers coming in, we're going to get a little bit of everything, some intel, some cyber, and some space. So they weren't going to be just specialized in one of those things. They were going to get a smattering of all of it, because they potentially, as they move out across their career, they're going to lead all of it. And so then leaving the enlisted force to be the true experts, that are the ones that are, the guys with the hands on keyboard, and leaving the officers to do the managing piece of the mission, maybe doing the wargaming piece, doing that integration piece that you're talking about, because there's got to be a separation of duties. Reality is there's a separation of pay, right? The pay is different. And so we can't have what we have had, which is young lieutenants sitting on console making more money than young enlisted sitting on that same console. And so those separation of duties is something that they're working pretty hard on.
Okay, so in this new paradigm, right, what's one piece of advice that you'd give to young officers who are trying to grow into the new version of what the Space Force looks like?
Oh, wow. Embrace it. I mean, I just got done saying, that, okay, nobody wants to hear, I've been doing this a long time, I know what right looks like, right? But this probably is what right looks like, and it's new, and it's funky. It's definitely different. It doesn't feel like you're specialized, maybe, and we just talked so much about how the Space Force was going to be a very specialized force like the Marines. But I do think that the talent that the Space Force is bringing in, I mean, just the aptitude of these folks, you can learn a lot. And when you just look at where those, where there's boundaries are, where you can fuse together cyber and intel and space, we're going to make just a stronger force than we probably could have ever imagined by letting folks just brain power weave in and out of more than just one area. And so I would say go with it. Try it out. Give them feedback. If it's not going to be perfect, nothing that we've done is going to be perfect. General Shaba, who's a STARCOM commander, used to say when we were opening up, our enlisted leadership academy classes, he would say, there's 100% chance that we didn't get this 100% right. And I loved that because it's like you just went in knowing that, yeah, there's going to be some things. Student feedback matters. And so I know that they're collecting that. It's just sometimes as you're staging that in, if you don't do it in the right timing, you know, if you do it at the end, for example, everybody just wants to go. They want to graduate. They're kind of over it by that point. And so you've got to figure out how you collect in that. And then, you know, what actually is useful, because sometimes people just check the box, right? But I think that they just should just go with it and give it a fair, honest shot, give feedback along the way, because that's going to improve. And everything can be iterated. That's how we do project management these days, right? Just iterate, iterate, iterate. And so that should be kind of your mindset on everything, coming in as a guardian.
And yeah, coming in to that youngest service in the DoD, what advice do you have to someone who sees maybe a rough edge that needs to get sanded off and wants to iterate but doesn't know how? Right?
Yes. There's a lot of rough edges. I mean, it's new. One thing I will say that was the most frustrating thing, because at my schoolhouse, you would get folks from all these different services that are now in one, you know, confined wall space for 5.5 weeks. And through that, you get a lot of opinions, you get a lot of scar tissue that folks didn't want to leave behind. They brought it in with them, and part of that's fine. They're squishy human people. That's just part of, you know, how it works. But I will say the biggest frustration was people said they wanted change, and they left their other service, and they wanted to be at the grassroots of something because they really wanted something to change. But then they wanted to bring in all this baggage and opinion and sometimes just, you know, cynicism that came with that. And so there would be me standing in, whether it was a classroom, an auditorium, or whatever, like, change management is a thing, for sure. We all have to learn as leaders how to do change management. Change tolerance is also a thing. And so, like, what is your change tolerance? Because regardless of what service you're in right now, the fact we've got adversarial threats that we just haven't seen like this before, you know, we're not talking necessarily just kinetic things anymore. Like, you've got to be always in this state of flux. You've got to always be practicing outsight, where we talked about insight and having a lot of insight, outsight, looking around, paying attention a lot. With that comes a lot of like, oh, didn't see that coming, or oh, maybe I did, and now I've got to change and maneuver. Change tolerance has to be something that we're okay with. You can't be stuck in old mindsets in a lot of ways. Maybe in certain little pockets it's okay. Most pockets, we're not going to get to where we need to be if you can't change. And so I think that you've got to figure out how to embrace a change mindset and be okay with it, and not be a fake it till you make it kind of person when it comes to that. It's hard. Change is hard. But that was the most frustrating thing, is people said they wanted it, and then the moment they came in, it was, why hasn't this system been developed? Or why haven't you guys put out policy on this yet? Or this process isn't completely fleshed out. And like, what did you think you were joining? You know, it's just crazy to me. Like, you said you want it to be, but change is hard, and doing things that are new and never been done before is also hard. And so, you know, you got to give some grace, meet people where they're at, but you also have to kind of push yourself a little bit.
And that's great advice for the individual, but really thinking slightly bigger picture, right? How can a junior leader come in and impact the organization's change tolerance?
Junior leaders are probably the ones that are the best at it, to be quite honest. As far as having the new ideas and the energy and the initiative, getting some of the old mindset to shift it's more than a 1 year, 2 year problem. You know, to build a new culture probably takes a minimum of 10 years, if I were to guess. And that's if everything were to line up perfectly for you. You know, because you got to kind of squeeze out some of that old mindset, and some of that's just chipping away and sometimes feeling defeated. But I think just getting up every day and going in, and I have this mindset of, it doesn't matter to me if we've done things wrong 100 times in the past, and maybe that's just become the norm. You know, maybe it's not to the point where it's wrong, where it's, you know, something's like dreadfully impacted. But the reality is you can tell if a model doesn't fit anymore. And how willing are you to come forward and say that out loud in an audience that maybe it's not going to be the popular opinion? I saw a thing the other day, they call it the IKEA effect, and it's basically where, you know, if you go to IKEA and you get some modular furniture and you put it together, if you did the blood, sweat, and tears, and IKEA furniture looks pretty nice when you put it together. But if you're the person that's grinding the the screws and the screwdriver, and you walk into a room and you want to now show off your new bookcase, dresser, whatever it is. There's a different pride with a thing that you developed and you put together because you know that actually took some time and blood and, sweat and energy, right? But somebody else can walk in and be like, oh yeah, a bookshelf. No one cares. But the fact that you cling to it because you've got that attachment of building the thing, it stalls us a lot with people. If they've got a process, a spreadsheet, some kind of tool that they've used for a long time, and that maybe it's always worked okay enough, but if they're that product developer, guess who's not going to want to let go of it? And so we've got to learn to let go of things that, even if they're things that we built. Yeah, Jay Shetty called it the IKEA effect. I thought that was kind of funny. When I listened to a podcast the other day, I was like, people, you see that all the time. It's not the best way. It's just their way. It was the way for a while, but now that way just doesn't. You got to let people poke holes in it. You got to be a person that's willing to poke holes. And so I don't know, I find great fun in disruption. Asking why, channel your inner 5-year-old. Why? Because why? Why? And if you get to 3 whys with somebody and they can't answer your question, they don't know why either. They're just doing it because they've likely been trained that that's the way we do things. And so those fresh eyes, those young minds are so great if you just let them poke holes. And so it's going to take some time. Not everybody loves that, but there is some power in disruptive. It doesn't have to be destructive to be disruptive and just switch things up,
So in an organization as young as the Space Force, do you really have, it's called a culture of, well, that's just the way it's always been done?
Well, because it's a melting pot, right? So people bring in what's always been done from their other experiences, and then, really, we struggled a lot at the beginning with everybody that was in the Space Force at the beginning were former airmen. And so people were just calling it Air Force 2.0. And, just that's what they were going with. And as we started to bring in the former, Marines and the Army and the Navy, well, then it's like we really had to look at, okay, how much are we just hanging on to because there's more of us, and this is really what we've always done. And we would come into some pockets sometimes where it was a little, folks there'd be a little tension in the room. But when you really took those blinders off and let folks talk and listen more than you spoke, then you could really get some good value from those moments.
All right, that's a great example of the power of diversity of thought and turning Air Force 2.0 into a truly independent Space Force that benefits from all of those different, not just people, but the backgrounds that they bring into the conversation. Chief, as we run up on the end of our time together, do you have any just final pieces of advice for young leaders in the Space Force?
I didn't really think about this, but I would say, just off the cuff, you're going to be put in a lot of positions that you're going to feel that you're not qualified for. And so, again, that's how that imposter syndrome builds, right? Imposter syndrome is just incredibly unhealthy. And so do what we talked about a little bit, which is, just be okay with saying, I don't know. Help me understand. Help me learn this thing. But I would say you have to be a little bit okay, hopefully a lot okay, as you do it more and more, with knowing that that's going to become your norm, that you're put in these uncomfortable positions. They're doing that because they see goodness in you. It doesn't always feel good. It feels clunky that first 6 months you're in something that you don't know what you're doing. You just feel very exposed and vulnerable. But I would say you got to believe in yourself. You got to believe that you haven't failed at anything epically up until, maybe you failed, right? We've all got some failure. But nothing epically up to this point. Why would this be any different? And so you just got to give yourself that grace, give yourself a little bit of self-love, oh, I got this. And then 6 months, down the road, you'll feel better about it, and you realize that you actually do got this, and you can do this too. And so there's a lot of things that you can be great at. Just don't limit yourself by staying in one place for too long.
I'd say that's a perfect way to end it. Chief, thank you so much for making the time to be here today. If we get any other questions from the force, may I reach out to you by email and just pass those along?
Okay, sure, absolutely.
Well, perfect. Hey, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Please like, comment, and share, or just check out one of our other interviews. You can also visit our website via the link below to submit your questions so you can participate in the next interview.